I've always been a man of the mountains, a seeker of thrills in places where few dare to tread. My hands, calloused from years of scaling sheer rock faces, trembled slightly as I gripped the cold steel of my gear. This expedition was meant to be no different. A journey into the heart of a newly discovered cave system, deep in the wilderness, untouched by human hands. But from the moment I set foot inside, I felt it. A whisper of unease that clung to the air like a fog, thick and suffocating. The entrance was a gaping maw, jagged rocks framing the abyss like the teeth of some ancient beast. As I descended into the darkness, the world above seemed to slip away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the oppressive silence of the cave. My headlamp cast long shadows on the walls, revealing strange patterns in the rock, patterns that seemed almost too deliberate, as if carved by something with purpose. The further I went, the more these shapes seemed to form grotesque faces, leering at me from the corners of my vision. The first night, I set up camp in a small alcove, the only sound the distant drip of water echoing through the caverns. I tried to ignore the sense of being watched, of something just beyond the reach of my light. Sleep came reluctantly, chased away by the oppressive stillness that seemed to press in on me from all sides. When I finally drifted off, my dreams were dark and twisted, visions of hands clawing at me from the walls, of whispers that I couldn't quite make out, but that filled me with a dread I couldn't shake. Morning, or what passed for morning in this eternal night, brought no comfort. As I packed up my gear, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My tools, which I had placed carefully beside me, were scattered across the ground as if thrown in a fit of rage. The food I had rationed was opened, bites taken out of it, but I was alone. Or so I thought. Determined to press on, I descended deeper into the cave, the walls closing in tighter with every step. The air grew colder, a damp chill that sank into my bones. The uneasy feeling from the day before had grown, morphing into a knot of fear that settled in my stomach. I couldn't shake the sensation that I was not alone, that something was there with me, hiding in the shadows just out of sight. As I rounded a corner, the beam of my headlamp flickered, then died, plunging me into absolute darkness. Panic surged through me, my breath coming in ragged gasps as I fumbled for the spare batteries in my pack. My fingers, usually so steady, trembled as I finally managed to switch them out. The light returned, but the relief was short-lived. In the brief darkness, I had heard it. Faint, almost imperceptible, but unmistakable. A whisper, low and insidious, echoing from deep within the cave. It was a voice speaking in a language I didn't understand, but the tone was clear, mocking, malevolent. I froze, straining to hear more, but the whisper was gone, leaving only the sound of my own frantic heartbeat echoing in the confined space. I wanted to believe it was my mind playing tricks on me, the isolation getting to me. But the fear gnawing at my gut told me otherwise. Shaking off the terror, I pushed forward, deeper into the cave. But the further I went, the stronger the sense of dread became. The air grew heavier. The walls seemed to close in, and the shadows lengthened, moving as if alive. Every sound, every drip of water, every crunch of gravel underfoot seemed amplified, distorted, like the cave itself was alive, watching, waiting. That night, as I tried to sleep, the whispers returned, closer this time, curling around my thoughts like a serpent. I could almost make out words, twisted and distorted, filled with promises of things I didn't want to understand. My dreams were worse. Nightmarish visions of being buried alive, of clawing my way through the earth only to find myself back in the cave, the walls covered in the same grotesque faces that leered at me from the shadows. When I awoke, drenched in sweat despite the cold, I found my belongings once again disturbed. My climbing rope was frayed, as if gnawed by sharp teeth, and my water supply had been drained, the bottles empty and dry. The terror that had been a whisper at the edge of my consciousness was now a scream, a constant presence that filled me with a bone-deep fear. Something was in the cave with me, something that wasn't human. I could feel it, sense it in every shadow, in every whisper that slithered through the darkness. And as I prepared to descend even deeper, I knew, whatever it was waiting for me, drawing me further into the abyss, where the light couldn't reach, and where the whispers would finally make sense. As I descended further into the labyrinth of the cave, the air grew thicker, more oppressive, as if it carried the weight of centuries of secrets. The narrow passages twisted and turned, each corner revealing more of the unsettling patterns etched into the walls. They seemed to pulse with a life of their own, shifting slightly whenever I glanced away, as though mocking my attempts to understand them. My headlamp's beam, once a steady guide, now flickered erratically, casting jagged shadows that danced in the corners of my vision, fueling the paranoia gnawing at my sanity. The first signs that something was terribly wrong came in the form of subtle, almost imperceptible changes. At first, I noticed my gear wasn't where I had left it. A carabiner that I distinctly remembered clipping to my belt loop now lay several feet away, as if it had been deliberately moved. My rope, coiled neatly the night before, was now in a tangled heap, as though it had been hastily thrown aside. These small inconsistencies should have been easy to dismiss. Perhaps I was tired, maybe I had simply forgotten. But deep down, I knew something was amiss. The cave was playing tricks on me, or worse, something inside it was. The whispers began to grow louder, no longer just a faint murmur at the edge of my hearing, but a persistent, insidious presence. They echoed through the narrow tunnels, bouncing off the walls in a disorienting cacophony of sound. At first, I couldn't make out any distinct words, just a low, unintelligible hum that seemed to vibrate through the very rock. But as I ventured deeper, the whispers began to take shape, forming words in a language that was both unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. One night, as I lay in the darkness trying to will myself to sleep, the whispers intensified. They surrounded me, coming from all directions at once, as if the walls themselves were speaking. I strained to understand, catching fragments of sentences, commands, warnings, threats. They spoke of things I couldn't comprehend, ancient and malevolent, their tone dripping with malice. The words slithered into my mind, burrowing deep, leaving behind a sense of dread that clung to my thoughts like a thick, suffocating fog. The dreams that followed were worse than any nightmare I had ever experienced. In them, I was wandering the cave, but it was not the cave I knew. The walls were alive, pulsing with a dark energy, their surfaces covered in writhing, serpentine shapes. The whispers in my waking hours were a mere shadow of the cacophony that filled my dreams. They screamed at me, taunted me, telling me of horrors that awaited in the depths. I woke each morning drenched in sweat, my heart racing, and the echoes of those voices lingering long after I opened my eyes. As the days went on, the line between dream and reality began to blur. I would wake in a panic, unsure if the horrors I had seen were just figments of my imagination or something more. I began to notice strange markings on my skin, as if I had been scratched or clawed at in the night. My hands shook as I examined the marks, trying to convince myself they were just the result of my restless sleep. But the fear gnawing at my gut told me otherwise. During one particularly harrowing day, I came across something that nearly made me turn back. In a small hidden chamber deep within the cave, I found a collection of objects. Trinkets, old and weathered, scattered across the ground. There were scraps of fabric, rusted tools, and fragments of bone, all arranged in a pattern that made my blood run cold. It was as if someone, or something, had been here before me, leaving behind these remnants as a warning. But a warning of what? I couldn't say, and the thought of it sent chills down my spine. The whispers grew bolder after that discovery, their tone shifting from taunting to commanding. They urged me deeper, pushing me toward something I couldn't see but could feel with every fiber of my being. The path ahead became increasingly treacherous, the walls narrowing, the air growing colder with each step. I began to see things in the darkness, shadows that didn't belong, fleeting glimpses of movement at the edge of my vision. And always, the whispers, relentless, driving me forward. It wasn't long before I started hearing more than just whispers. At first, it was subtle. A rustle, a scrape, the sound of something moving just out of sight. I would stop, holding my breath, straining to hear more, but the cave would fall silent, as if mocking my fear. Then, the sounds grew louder, footsteps, echoing in the tunnels behind me, the crunch of gravel underfoot, the distant sound of breathing that wasn't mine. Each time I turned to confront whatever was there, I found nothing but the oppressive darkness, yet the feeling of being watched, hunted, grew stronger with every passing moment. The breaking point came when I found my own footsteps leading in the wrong direction. I had been following a clear path, marking my trail as I went. But when I turned around, I found that my tracks doubled back on themselves in impossible ways, leading me in circles. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. I was no longer in control of where I was going. The cave had taken on a life of its own, twisting and distorting reality around me, and I was caught in its web. By now, my sense of time had begun to erode. Hours, perhaps days, passed in a blur of darkness and terror. My rations dwindled, but I was too afraid to stop, too afraid of what might happen if I stayed still for too long. The whispers had become my constant companion, their words growing clearer, more demanding. They told me to continue, to delve deeper, to embrace the darkness and the secrets it held. They promised answers, but at a cost I wasn't sure I was willing to pay. The mystery had grown into something far more sinister than I could have ever imagined. Every step, every breath, every heartbeat echoed with the unshakable feeling that I was being drawn into a trap, that the cave itself was a predator, toying with me, leading me ever closer to its maw. And yet, despite the terror that gripped my heart, I couldn't stop. The whispers wouldn't let me. Isolation has a way of eroding the mind, chipping away at the edges of sanity until all that's left is a fragile, trembling shell. The deeper I ventured into the cave, the more this truth became apparent. The whispers had become my constant companions, a ceaseless chorus that gnawed at my resolve and turned my thoughts against me. The fear that had once been a distant hum was now a thunderous roar, drowning out all reason and logic. I was no longer just navigating the treacherous passages of the cave. I was wandering through the dark corridors of my own mind, lost and alone. It wasn't long before I began to distrust everything around me. The walls, the floor, even the air seemed to pulse with a malevolent energy, as if the cave itself was alive, watching my every move. I caught myself speaking aloud, at first just muttering to break the oppressive silence, but soon the whispers in my head were answered by my own voice, as though I were conversing with them, pleading with them to leave me in peace. But they never did. If anything, my desperate attempts to shut them out only seemed to strengthen their hold on me. The paranoia set in quickly. Every sound, every shadow became a potential threat. The crunch of gravel underfoot was no longer just an echo, but the footsteps of something following me, stalking me through the darkness. I would whirl around, headlamp flashing wildly, but there was never anything there, only the suffocating blackness, closing in tighter with each passing moment. The feeling of being watched grew unbearable, an itch beneath my skin that I couldn't scratch, a gnawing certainty that I was not alone, even when the cave appeared empty. My thoughts became fragmented, splintered by the constant barrage of fear. I found myself questioning everything, my surroundings, my memories, even my own mind. The cave seemed to twist and warp around me, the tunnels looping back on themselves in ways that defied logic. I would leave markers only to find them inexplicably moved or destroyed when I tried to retrace my steps. My map was useless, a crumpled piece of paper that bore no resemblance to the nightmare I was trapped in. I began to suspect that the cave was shifting, changing its layout to confuse and trap me. But deep down, I feared the truth was far worse, that my mind was the one unraveling, twisting reality into a grotesque parody of itself. I began to see things that couldn't be real, shapes moving in the darkness, faces in the rock, eyes that blinked at me from the shadows. At first, they were fleeting glimpses, barely there before vanishing, leaving me questioning whether I had seen anything at all. But as the days stretched on, the hallucinations grew more vivid, more tangible. I would catch sight of a figure in the corner of my eye, only for it to disappear when I turned to face it. Sometimes I would hear footsteps echoing behind me, growing louder and closer, until I spun around, only to find nothing but the empty cave. The isolation was unbearable. Cut off from the world above, from any semblance of normalcy, I began to unravel. My thoughts, once clear and focused, became jumbled, chaotic. I would find myself staring at the same spot on the wall for hours, unable to tear my gaze away, convinced that if I looked away, something terrible would happen. The whispers, once distant and unclear, now spoke directly to me, filling my mind with dark thoughts and terrible suggestions. They told me that I would never leave the cave, that I was doomed to wander its endless passages until I became just another lost soul, another whisper in the dark. I started to doubt my own memories. Did I really enter this cave with a purpose, or had I been lured here by something far more sinister? I couldn't remember the details of my life before the cave, the faces of loved ones, the sound of their voices. It all seemed so distant, so unreal, as though it had been a dream. The only reality now was the cave and the whispers that haunted me. My grip on reality was slipping. The paranoia and fear twisted my thoughts, turning me against myself. I would see shadows moving just beyond the reach of my light, hear my name whispered in the dark, feel the brush of unseen hands on my skin. Every moment was a battle against the terror that threatened to consume me, a struggle to hold on to some shred of sanity. But the cave was relentless, its darkness a living thing that sought to devour me whole. One night, or perhaps it was day, time had lost all meaning. I stumbled upon something that shattered whatever remained of my resolve. Deep within the cave, in a chamber that felt more like a tomb, I found a journal, its pages yellowed and brittle with age. The handwriting was erratic, scrawled in frantic haste, and as I read, my blood turned to ice. The words described exactly what I was experiencing: the whispers, the hallucinations, the feeling of being watched. The journal's owner had been a previous explorer, someone who, like me, had ventured too far into the darkness and had paid the price. But the final entry was the worst. It spoke of a presence in the cave, something ancient and malevolent, a force that fed on fear and despair. The writer had encountered it, deep in the cave's heart, and the encounter had driven them mad. They wrote of seeing their own death, of the cave showing them visions of their final moments, of the whispers growing louder until they were all-consuming, drowning out everything else. I dropped the journal, my hands shaking uncontrollably. The fear that had been a constant presence now threatened to overwhelm me completely. I was trapped in the same nightmare, following the same path as the journal's author, and I knew, with a sickening certainty, that the same fate awaited me. The whispers, now louder and more insistent than ever, urged me to continue, to descend deeper into the cave, where the darkness was thickest and the terror most intense. But something inside me rebelled against the voices. I couldn't let them win, couldn't let the cave consume me. Yet even as I made the decision to turn back, to try and escape the madness, I knew it was too late. The darkness had already seeped into my mind, twisting my thoughts, warping reality. The cave had taken hold of me, and there was no escape from its grasp. The only question that remained was how long I could hold on before the whispers finally drove me to the edge, and I became just another lost soul in the depths of the abyss. The descent into madness was not sudden, but a slow, agonizing slide into the abyss, where the boundaries between reality and nightmare dissolved like mist. Each step deeper into the cave felt like a step further from sanity, as if the very ground beneath me was pulling me into the darkness, eager to swallow me whole. The once steady rhythm of my heartbeat had turned erratic, echoing in my ears like the drumbeat of a funeral march, driving me ever closer to the edge. The whispers had become a constant presence, no longer just a voice in the back of my mind, but a cacophony of malevolent voices, each one more insistent, more demanding than the last. They clawed at my thoughts, warping my perception, twisting every shadow into a lurking threat, every sound into a portent of doom. I could no longer distinguish between the real and the unreal. The cave had become a living nightmare, a labyrinth where logic held no sway and terror reigned supreme. The walls of the cave seemed to close in on me, pressing down with a weight that crushed the air from my lungs. The tunnels, once wide enough to walk through with ease, now felt like they were suffocating me, squeezing the life out of me with every step. My breathing grew shallow, each gasp a desperate struggle for air as the oppressive darkness wrapped itself around me like a shroud. And then there were the visions. Horrific, twisted visions that haunted my every waking moment. I would catch glimpses of movement in the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing but the cold, unforgiving stone. But the images lingered in my mind, festering like an infection. I saw faces in the rock, twisted and deformed, their eyes hollow and empty, staring at me with a malevolent hunger. They whispered to me, their voices a sickening chorus that echoed in my skull, telling me things I didn't want to hear, things I couldn't ignore. As I ventured deeper, the visions grew more vivid, more real. I would see figures standing in the shadows, their forms shifting and writhing like smoke. They beckoned to me, urging me to follow, to surrender to the darkness. And I did. I followed them, my mind too clouded with fear to resist, each step taking me further from the light, further into the abyss. The cave began to play tricks on me, warping the landscape into a twisted mockery of reality. The tunnels seemed to stretch and contract, leading me in circles, turning back on themselves in impossible ways. I would walk for hours, only to find myself back where I started, my footprints mocking me from the ground. The once familiar path had become a maze, a labyrinth of shifting shadows and dead ends, where every turn brought me face to face with my deepest fears. My sense of time had long since abandoned me. I had no way of knowing how long I had been in the cave. Days, weeks, perhaps even longer. The concept of time itself had lost all meaning, reduced to a series of disjointed moments, each one more terrifying than the last. Sleep was no refuge. When I closed my eyes, the darkness only grew deeper, more suffocating. The whispers followed me into my dreams, turning them into nightmares that left me screaming and thrashing in the darkness, my voice echoing off the stone walls, only to be swallowed by the silence. The hallucinations became more frequent, more terrifying. I would see creatures crawling out of the walls, their bodies twisted and malformed, their eyes glowing with an unnatural light. They would scuttle across the floor, their limbs moving in jerky, unnatural motions, leaving trails of darkness in their wake. I would hear their claws scraping against the stone, the sound like nails on a chalkboard, setting my teeth on edge. But when I reached out to touch them, they would vanish, leaving nothing but the cold, unyielding rock. The voices grew louder, more insistent, demanding that I go deeper, that I embrace the darkness. They promised me freedom, but I knew it was a lie, a twisted, cruel joke meant to break me. But still, I obeyed. I had no choice. The whispers had burrowed into my mind, taking root in the darkest corners of my soul. They fed on my fear, my despair, growing stronger with every passing moment. I was no longer in control. Whatever force inhabited the cave had taken over, steering me toward an inevitable end. And the cave itself, it was alive. I could feel it breathing, its walls pulsing with a dark, malevolent energy. The ground beneath my feet seemed to shift, as if the cave was trying to swallow me whole. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a cloying, suffocating odor that filled my lungs and made me gag. I could hear the sound of something wet and heavy moving in the darkness, just beyond the reach of my light, its presence a constant reminder of the horror that awaited me. The realization that I was losing my grip on reality hit me like a blow to the chest. I could feel my mind unraveling, the threads of sanity slipping through my fingers like sand. I knew I had to escape, had to find a way out before the cave consumed me completely. But every attempt to turn back was met with failure. The cave had become a prison, a maze with no exit, and I was its captive. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the whispers were leading me somewhere, towards something. They were not random, but deliberate, guiding me deeper into the heart of the cave. I didn't know what awaited me at the end of this journey, but I knew it was something terrible, something beyond my worst nightmares. The fear that had once been a constant companion now threatened to overwhelm me, drowning me in a sea of terror that left me gasping for breath. As I descended further into the cave, the hallucinations grew more intense, more real. The walls seemed to close in on me, the darkness pressing down with a weight that threatened to crush me. I could feel the presence of something behind me, its breath hot on the back of my neck, its eyes boring into the back of my skull. I would turn, expecting to see a creature, a demon, something, anything. But there was nothing, just the darkness, watching, waiting. The voices were no longer just in my head. They were all around me, filling the cave with their malevolent whispers. They spoke of death, of despair, of horrors that awaited me if I continued. But they also spoke of something else, something darker, more insidious. They spoke of a power that lay hidden in the depths of the cave, a power that could give me everything I ever wanted, but at a price I wasn't sure I was willing to pay. But the cave left me no choice. The walls closed in, the darkness grew thicker, and the whispers louder. I had to keep going, had to find whatever lay at the heart of this nightmare, even if it meant losing myself completely. The cave had taken hold of me, and there was no turning back. I was trapped in a downward spiral, a descent into madness from which there was no escape. The only way out was through, and the only thing waiting for me at the end was darkness. Pure, unrelenting darkness. The deeper I went, the more the cave seemed to transform, its walls shifting and changing, growing more alien, more hostile. The air grew colder, the stench of decay more overpowering. My light flickered and dimmed, leaving me in near total darkness. I could feel the presence of something just out of sight, something ancient and malevolent, watching me, waiting for the moment when I would finally break. And then I saw it, a faint light in the distance, a flicker of hope in the suffocating darkness. It beckoned to me, promising an end to the madness, a way out of the nightmare. But as I moved toward it, I realized with a sinking dread that the light was not salvation, but a trap, a lure designed to lead me deeper into the abyss. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, pushing me forward, telling me to embrace the darkness, to surrender to it completely. I hesitated, fear and doubt gnawing at my resolve. But the cave left me no choice. It was either move forward or be consumed by the darkness that surrounded me. And so, with a heart full of dread and a mind teetering on the brink of insanity, I stepped toward the light, knowing that whatever awaited me would be far worse than anything I could imagine. The downward spiral had reached its final turn, and there was no going back. The moment I crossed the threshold into the chamber, I knew there was no turning back. The whispers had guided me here, their voices intertwining into a sinister harmony that spoke of promises and threats alike. The air was thick with tension, as if the very fabric of reality was stretched thin, ready to tear at any moment. The chamber was vast, the walls disappearing into the darkness above, and the only light came from a faint, eerie glow that emanated from the ground, casting long, distorted shadows that danced across the uneven stone floor. In the center of the chamber stood a monolith, an ancient stone structure covered in cryptic symbols that seemed to pulse with a life of their own. The symbols were familiar, echoes of the patterns I had seen throughout the cave. But here they were more intricate, more menacing, as if they held a secret that had been buried for eons. The whispers grew louder, their tone urgent, commanding, as they pushed me toward the monolith, urging me to uncover the truth that lay within. As I approached, I could feel the temperature drop, the air turning icy cold, each breath a struggle against the freezing chill that penetrated my skin and seeped into my bones. My heart pounded in my chest, a drumbeat of fear that resonated with the whispers, their cadence now matching the rhythm of my pulse. The closer I got, the more the symbols seemed to move, shifting and writhing like a mass of serpents, their meaning just out of reach, tantalizingly close, yet maddeningly elusive. I reached out, my hand trembling as it hovered over the surface of the monolith. The stone was cold to the touch, colder than anything I had ever felt, as if it were made of ice rather than rock. As my fingers brushed the symbols, a shock of pain shot up my arm, and I jerked back, but it was too late. The connection had been made, and the symbols flared to life, glowing with a blinding intensity that forced me to shield my eyes. When I opened them again, the chamber had changed. The walls, once rough and jagged, were now smooth and polished, reflecting the light from the monolith in a sickly, unnatural hue. The air was thick with the stench of decay, the odor so strong it made my eyes water and my stomach churn. The whispers were no longer just voices in my head. They filled the chamber, reverberating off the walls, a cacophony of sound that threatened to drive me mad. But amidst the chaos, there was a message hidden within the torrent of voices. It was a riddle, a puzzle that I had to solve if I was to escape the nightmare I'd stumbled into. The whispers taunted me, their words twisting and turning, giving me glimpses of the truth before snatching it away. The riddle was maddeningly complex, a labyrinth of contradictions and half-truths, designed to confuse and ensnare. The symbols on the monolith began to shift, rearranging themselves into patterns that I struggled to decipher. Each time I thought I had the answer, the symbols would change, mocking my efforts, driving me to the brink of despair. The whispers grew more frenzied, urging me to hurry, to solve the riddle before it was too late. But the more I tried to focus, the more the symbols seemed to blur, merging into a chaotic swirl of light and shadow that defied comprehension. I could feel my sanity slipping away, the pressure of the riddle crushing my mind under its weight. The chamber seemed to pulse with my heartbeat, the walls closing in, the darkness pressing down from above. My thoughts were a jumbled mess, a tangle of fear and confusion, and the whispers twisted them further, filling my head with doubts and nightmares. The riddle was more than just a puzzle, it was a test, a trial that demanded a sacrifice. The whispers hinted at this, their tone growing darker, more sinister, as they suggested that the only way to solve the riddle was to give in to the darkness, to embrace the madness that threatened to consume me. They whispered of power, of secrets hidden within the cave that could be mine if I was willing to pay the price. But they also spoke of doom, of an ancient curse that would befall anyone who dared to seek the truth. I fought against the urge to give in, to let the darkness take me, but the temptation was strong, almost irresistible. The riddle was an enigma that defied logic, a paradox that twisted my thoughts into knots. The symbols on the monolith pulsed with a sickly light, their meaning just out of reach, taunting me with the promise of knowledge that could either save me or damn me forever. In a moment of clarity, I realized that the riddle wasn't just about the symbols or the whispers. It was about me. The cave, the monolith, the whispers. They were all reflections of my own mind, my own fears and doubts made manifest. The riddle was a test of my will, a challenge to see if I could confront the darkness within myself and emerge unscathed. But the truth was far more terrifying than I could have ever imagined. The whispers revealed it to me, their voices blending into one, a single, terrible truth that shook me to my core. The cave was not just a place. It was a living entity, an ancient being that fed on the minds of those who entered, trapping them in an endless cycle of fear and madness. The riddle was its way of breaking me, of forcing me to confront the darkest parts of myself and then devour me whole. I fell to my knees, the weight of the revelation too much to bear. The chamber spun around me, the walls closing in, the light from the monolith growing brighter, more intense, until it was blinding. The whispers were no longer just in my head. They were inside me, a part of me, their voices merging with my thoughts, turning them against me. The riddle was unsolvable, a trap designed to drive me mad. But in that moment of despair, I realized that the only way to escape was not to solve the riddle, but to accept it, to embrace the darkness, to let go of my fear and give in to the madness. It was a choice between death and oblivion, between the end and a fate far worse. With a final shuddering breath, I reached out and placed my hand on the monolith once more. The pain was immediate, searing through my mind like a bolt of lightning, but I didn't pull away. I let the darkness wash over me, let the whispers consume me, until there was nothing left but the riddle, the monolith, and the darkness. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me was the symbols on the monolith, shifting into a final, terrible pattern, a pattern that spelled out the answer to the riddle, the truth that I had been seeking all along. But it was too late. The darkness swallowed me whole, and the chamber disappeared, leaving me alone in the void, with nothing but the echoes of the whispers and the knowledge that I had been defeated. The riddle was complete, but the cost was my soul. And, as the last vestiges of my sanity slipped away, I realized that the cave had won. I was now just another lost soul, another whisper in the darkness, forever trapped in the riddle of the abyss. The chamber's walls seemed to breathe, expanding and contracting with every anxious breath I took, as if the very stone was alive, pulsating with a dark, malevolent energy. The monolith loomed before me, its surface etched with symbols that had ceased their maddening shift and now stood still, glowing with a foreboding light that cast the entire chamber into a sickly pallor. The whispers had stopped, replaced by an eerie silence that was somehow worse. A silence that thrummed with anticipation, as though the cave itself was holding its breath, waiting for what was to come. My mind was a battlefield, torn between the lingering vestiges of reason and the encroaching madness that threatened to engulf me. Every nerve in my body screamed at me to turn back, to flee this cursed place and never look back. But I knew, with a dreadful certainty, that there was no escape. The cave had drawn me to this point, guiding me through its labyrinthine corridors like a predator stalking its prey, and now I stood at the precipice of something far more terrifying than anything I had encountered thus far. The monolith beckoned, its symbols glowing brighter, casting long, writhing shadows that seemed to move of their own accord. They twisted and coiled across the floor, merging into shapes that were almost, but not quite, recognizable. I could see faces in the darkness, twisted and grotesque, their mouths stretched into silent screams of agony. The air was thick with the stench of decay, a putrid odor that filled my lungs and made every breath a struggle. But worse than the smell was the sensation of being watched, of unseen eyes boring into me from every direction, judging, condemning. My heart pounded in my chest, each beat echoing in the silence like the tolling of a death knell. The fear that had been a constant companion on this journey now surged to the forefront, an all-consuming terror that left me trembling, my knees threatening to buckle beneath me. Yet, despite the overwhelming dread, I found myself stepping forward, drawn inexorably toward the monolith, as if some unseen force was pulling me closer. As I reached out to touch the stone, the silence was shattered by a voice, deep, resonant, and filled with a cold, ancient malice. It spoke not in the whispers that had plagued me before, but in a language that was older than time itself, each word reverberating through the chamber, shaking the very foundations of the cave. The voice was not just in my ears, but in my mind, seeping into my thoughts, twisting them until I could no longer tell where the voice ended and my own mind began. "You have come far," the voice intoned, each word dripping with contempt. "But your journey is not yet complete." The symbols on the monolith began to shift again, rearranging themselves into a pattern that was both familiar and horrifying. It was a map of the cave, of the paths I had taken, and of the ones I had yet to traverse. But it was more than just a map. It was a record of my descent, a chronicle of the choices I had made, the fears I had faced, and the madness that had taken root in my soul. At the center of the map was a symbol that glowed brighter than the rest, pulsating with an unnatural light that hurt to look at. It was the final destination, the heart of the cave, where the truth awaited, where the horror that had haunted my every step would finally reveal itself. The voice spoke again, this time softer, almost coaxing. "Step forward," it commanded. "Embrace the darkness, and you will understand." I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to run, to fight against the pull of the monolith and the terror it promised. But the voice was relentless, its whispers now seeping into my bones, urging me onward. The chamber seemed to contract around me, the walls pressing in, forcing me toward the monolith, toward the inevitable confrontation with the nightmare that lay at the end of this journey. With trembling hands, I reached out once more, pressing my palm against the cold stone. The symbols flared to life, their light blinding, searing into my mind like a brand. Pain lanced through me, sharp and unrelenting, as if the monolith was draining the very life from me, feeding on my fear, my despair. I tried to pull away, but my hand was fused to the stone, held in place by some unseen force. The chamber around me dissolved, the walls melting away like wax, leaving me suspended in a void of absolute darkness. The only light came from the monolith, now floating before me, its symbols glowing with a malevolent energy that pulsed in time with my racing heart. The voice spoke again, its tone almost gentle, as if it were soothing a frightened child. "Behold the truth," it whispered, and the darkness around me began to shift, taking shape, coalescing into a vision that filled me with a dread so profound it left me gasping for breath. Before me stood a figure, shrouded in shadow, its form indistinct yet terrifyingly familiar. It was as if the darkness itself had taken on a human shape, an embodiment of all the fear, the madness, and the despair that had plagued me since I first entered the cave. Its eyes glowed with a cold, otherworldly light, and when it spoke, its voice was the same as the one that had been guiding me all along. "You are the final piece," it said, and the vision shifted, showing me scenes from my past, moments of fear and doubt, of anger and despair. I saw myself as a child, lost in the dark, crying out for help that never came. I saw every failure, every regret, every mistake, all laid bare before me, woven into the fabric of the darkness that surrounded me. The figure stepped forward, and I realized with a sickening dread that it was not just a reflection of my fears. It was me. It was the darkness within me, the part of my soul that had been consumed by the cave, by the whispers, by the endless descent into madness. And now, it stood before me, whole and complete, ready to claim what was left of my shattered mind. I tried to fight it, tried to deny the truth that was staring me in the face, but the voice would not be silenced. It spoke of inevitability, of fate, of the darkness that lies in every heart, waiting for the moment when it can break free and consume everything in its path. "You cannot escape," the figure whispered, its voice a mirror of my own. "You cannot hide from what you are." The void around me seemed to close in, the darkness growing thicker, more oppressive, until I could barely breathe. The monolith pulsed with a sickly light, its symbols burning into my mind, filling me with a terror so profound it left me paralyzed. The figure reached out, its hand a shadow within the shadow, and touched my chest. Cold, burning cold, seared into me, spreading through my body, turning my blood to ice. The voice spoke one final time, a whisper that echoed through the darkness, reverberating in my mind like a death knell. Accept it, embrace it, you are mine. And in that moment I understood. The cave, the monolith, the whispers, they were all part of the same entity, a being of pure darkness that fed on fear and despair, that thrived on the destruction of the soul, and I, in my hubris, had walked willingly into its embrace, drawn by the promise of knowledge, of truth. But the truth was not something to be understood or wielded. It was something to be feared, something that would consume me utterly, leaving nothing behind but the darkness. As the figure's hand pressed against my chest, I felt my heart stop, the cold seeping into my very core. The darkness swallowed me whole, and the last thing I saw was the light from the monolith flickering and dying, plunging the chamber into eternal night. I had reached the end of my journey, but there was no victory, no escape. The darkness had claimed me, and as my consciousness faded, I knew that I would become just another whisper in the void, another soul lost to the riddle of the abyss. The cave had won, and in its heart the darkness reigned supreme, eternal, and unchallenged. When the darkness finally receded, I found myself lying on the cold stone floor of the chamber, the weight of the monolith pressing down on me like a tombstone. My body felt broken, as if every bone had been shattered and reassembled in the wrong places. I could barely move, barely breathe, as the reality of what had happened began to sink in. The voice was gone, the whisper silenced, but the terror remained, a deep, unrelenting fear that gnawed at my insides like a festering wound. I forced myself to stand, every muscle protesting as I dragged myself to my feet. The chamber had changed again, the walls now slick with some dark, glistening substance that dripped from the ceiling in slow, viscous streams. The monolith, once glowing with a sickly light, now stood dark and silent, its symbols faded into barely visible scars on its surface. But the presence, the overwhelming sense of something ancient and malevolent, still lingered, filling the air with a palpable tension that made my skin crawl. My mind was a fractured mess, memories of the confrontation with the figure, a manifestation of my own darkness, flickering in and out like a faulty reel of film. I could still feel its touch, the cold that had seeped into my bones, the sense of inevitability as the darkness claimed me. But somehow I had survived. Or had I? The question lingered at the edge of my thoughts, a gnawing doubt that refused to be silenced. The only thing I knew for certain was that I had to get out of the cave, out of this nightmare before it consumed me completely. But as I turned to leave, I realized with a sinking dread that the chamber had no exit. The way I had come was gone, swallowed by the darkness. And all that remained was the monolith, standing like a sentinel in the center of the room, guarding whatever lay beyond. I circled the chamber, my hand trailing along the slick, pulsating walls as I searched for any sign of an escape. But there was nothing. No door, no tunnel, not even a crack in the stone that I could wedge myself through. I was trapped, a prisoner in this chamber of horrors, with no way out and no hope of rescue. The realization hit me like a blow, knocking the breath from my lungs, and I slumped against the wall, my mind racing as I tried to comprehend the full scope of my situation. The darkness began to close in again, the shadows creeping across the floor, drawn to me like moths to a flame. I could feel their touch, cold and insidious, as they wrapped around my ankles, pulling me toward the monolith. Panic surged through me, and I fought against the pull, scrambling backward, but it was no use. The darkness was relentless, a tide of black that swallowed everything in its path, and I was powerless to stop it. As the shadows reached the base of the monolith, the symbols flared to life once more, their light flickering like dying embers. The chamber began to hum with a low, resonant frequency that vibrated through my bones, making my teeth chatter and my head ache. The sound grew louder, more intense, until it was all I could hear, A deafening roar that drowned out my thoughts and left me gasping for breath. The monolith began to shift, its surface rippling like water as the symbols rearranged themselves into a new pattern. The light intensified, burning with a cold blue fire that illuminated the chamber in stark relief, casting long, distorted shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. I watched, frozen in terror, as the monolith began to split down the middle, the stone cracking open to reveal a void of pure, impenetrable darkness. And from that void, something emerged. At first, it was just a shape, indistinct and formless. A shadow within a shadow that moved with a grace that was both unnatural and terrifying. But as it stepped into the light, its form solidified, revealing a creature that defied all logic, all reason. It was tall and thin, its limbs elongated and twisted, its skin a sickly gray that seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Its face, or what passed for a face, was a grotesque mockery of human features, with hollow, empty eyes that stared into my soul and a mouth that stretched impossibly wide, filled with rows of needle-sharp teeth. The creature moved with a fluid, almost graceful motion, its body contorting in ways that should have been impossible as it stepped toward me, its eyes locked onto mine. I could feel its gaze, cold and penetrating, as if it were peeling back the layers of my mind, exposing my every fear, every doubt, every dark thought I had ever had. The terror that had been simmering beneath the surface now erupted into full-blown panic, and I tried to run, but my legs refused to move, my body paralyzed by the sheer weight of the creature's presence. It reached out a hand, if it could be called a hand, its fingers long and spindly, tipped with claws that gleamed in the dim light. The air around it seemed to warp and twist, bending reality itself as it moved, distorting the space between us into a nightmare of angles and shadows. The creature's mouth opened wider, impossibly wide, and a sound emerged. A low, guttural growl that vibrated through my chest, freezing the blood in my veins. As the creature drew closer, the shadows on the walls began to shift and dance, taking on the shapes of the faces I had seen in my visions, their mouths opening in silent screams. The walls themselves seemed to pulse, the dark substance dripping from the ceiling now flowing like rivers of black blood, pooling on the floor and spreading outward in a slow, inexorable tide. The entire chamber seemed to come alive, the darkness feeding off my fear, growing stronger with every passing second. The creature stopped just inches from me, its face, or what remained of it, looming over mine, its breath a cold, fetid wind that smelled of decay and death. Its eyes bored into mine, and I felt something inside me break, a barrier I had erected to keep the madness at bay shattering under the weight of the creature's gaze. I could feel it probing my mind, searching for something, some truth that I didn't want to face, some fear that I had buried deep within myself. And then, in a voice that was not a voice but a thought, it spoke. "You belong to the darkness now," it said, its words echoing in my mind, each syllable a dagger of ice that pierced my thoughts. "You are one with the void, with the abyss. There's no escape, no salvation, only the endless night, the eternal terror that consumes all who enter." The shadows surged forward, engulfing me, and I felt myself falling, tumbling into the void that had opened beneath me, the darkness swallowing me whole. The creature's voice echoed in my ears, growing fainter and fainter as I fell deeper and deeper, until there was nothing but the cold, unfeeling void, a darkness so complete that it blotted out all thought, all sense of self. I don't know how long I fell, seconds, minutes, hours, days. Time had no meaning in the abyss, no beginning and no end. The darkness was all there was, all there would ever be. I was alone, lost in the void, with nothing but the echo of the creature's voice and the knowledge that I had become a part of the cave, a part of the darkness that had claimed so many before me. But even in the abyss, the terror remained. It was not a terror of the darkness, or of the creature, or of the void itself. It was a terror of what I had become, of what I had lost. I had surrendered to the darkness, allowed it to consume me, to twist me into something else, something monstrous. And now I was trapped, forever lost in the abyss, with no hope of escape, no chance of redemption. The last vestiges of my sanity slipped away, and I felt myself dissolving into the darkness. My thoughts, my memories, my very soul fading into the void. The creature's voice was gone. The shadows had receded, and all that was left was the endless night, the cold, unfeeling void that stretched on forever. I was alone in the darkness, but I was not alone. I could feel them, the others who had been consumed by the cave, their souls trapped in the void, their whispers, now a part of the darkness that surrounded me. I had become one of them, another lost soul, another whisper in the void, forever trapped in the abyss of terror. The abyss had claimed me, and I existed in that void for what felt like an eternity. My thoughts scattered like leaves in a storm, my memories eroding with each passing moment. The darkness was not just around me, but within me, a cold, consuming presence that seeped into every corner of my being. It was a place where time had no meaning, where the concept of self dissolved into the vast, impenetrable blackness. I was no longer sure if I was alive or dead, or if those distinctions even mattered anymore. All I knew was the darkness, the void that stretched on forever, and the whispers that had once been my tormentors, now a constant, distant murmur, barely audible, like the dying echoes of a nightmare. But then, just as I'd resigned myself to this eternal fate, something changed. A light appeared in the distance, faint at first, like a star flickering in the night sky, barely perceptible against the overwhelming blackness. It was different from the cold, sickly glow of the monolith. This light was warm, almost inviting, like the first rays of dawn after a long, dark night. I felt an inexplicable pull toward it, a desire to reach out and grasp it, to let it guide me out of the void. I moved toward the light, or perhaps it moved toward me. Direction had lost all meaning in the abyss. The closer I got, the brighter it became, until it was all I could see, a blinding radiance that cut through the darkness like a knife. For the first time, in what felt like eons, I felt something other than fear and despair. I felt hope, a fragile, flickering hope that maybe, just maybe, there was a way out, a chance to escape the nightmare that had consumed me. But as I reached out to touch the light, something stopped me. A voice, soft and gentle, yet filled with a warning that sent a chill down my spine. "Are you sure?" the voice asked, and in that moment, the light seemed to waver, as if uncertain of its own existence. "Are you sure this is what you want?" The question hung in the air, and with it came a flood of memories, memories of the cave, of the monolith, of the creature that had claimed me. The light was not just a way out, it was a choice, a crossroads between two paths. One led back to the world I had left behind, the world of light and life, but with it came the burden of everything I had seen, everything I had done. The other path was the one I had already taken, the path of darkness, of surrender, of becoming one with the void. The voice spoke again, its tone soothing, almost comforting. "The darkness is eternal. It will always be here, waiting for you. You can choose to leave, to return to the light, but know that it will come at a cost. The terror, the madness, they will never truly leave you. They will be a part of you, haunting your every step, every thought. Can you live with that?" The light flickered once more, and I hesitated. The thought of returning to the world, of facing the horrors that awaited me there, was almost as terrifying as the void itself. The darkness had become a part of me, a shadow that clung to my soul, and I knew that I would never be free of it, no matter how far I ran, no matter how bright the light. But the alternative was unthinkable. To remain in the void, to let the darkness consume me completely, was to surrender everything that made me who I was. It was to become nothing, to lose my humanity, my very soul, to the abyss. The light was a chance, however slim, to reclaim what I had lost, to fight against the darkness, even if it meant living in its shadow for the rest of my days. I reached out again, my hand trembling, and as my fingers brushed against the light, I felt a warmth that I'd long forgotten. It filled me, pushing back the cold, the fear, the despair, and for a moment, I believed that I could escape, that I could find my way back to the world of the living. But as I stepped into the light, the darkness surged around me, trying to pull me back, to drag me down into the void once more. The whispers returned, louder and more insistent, their voices filled with anger, with desperation. They clawed at me, tearing at my mind, trying to break my resolve. The light flickered, dimming, as if it were struggling to hold back the tide of shadows that threatened to engulf me. I fought against the pull, every step a battle, every breath a struggle. The light was fading, slipping through my fingers, and I knew that if I lost it, I would be lost as well, forever trapped in the abyss. But the darkness was strong, relentless, and with every passing moment, it grew stronger, feeding off my fear, my doubt. The voice spoke again, a final time, its tone heavy with resignation. "The choice is yours," it said. "But remember, the darkness will always be with you. It will never let you go, never truly release you. Even in the light, you will carry it with you, in your mind, in your soul. Are you prepared to live with that? To face the terror every day, knowing that it could consume you at any moment?" I hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on me like a physical force. The light was fading fast, and I knew I had only seconds to make my choice. To stay in the void was to surrender, to lose myself completely. But to step into the light was to carry the burden of the darkness with me, to live in constant fear of what I had seen, of what I had become. In the end, I made my choice. With one final effort, I stepped fully into the light, letting it envelop me, fill me with its warmth, its promise of escape. The darkness roared in fury, but it was too late. The light surged, blinding, and I felt the pull of the void weaken, the shadows recede, until there was nothing but the light, pure and blinding, washing over me, cleansing me of the terror, the madness. And then, just as suddenly as it had come, the light was gone. I found myself lying on the ground, the cold, hard earth beneath me, the air thick with the scent of moss and damp soil. The cave was gone, the monolith, the chamber, the void, all of it had vanished, leaving me alone in the silence of the forest. The sun was rising, its golden rays filtering through the trees, casting long shadows on the ground, and for a moment I was overwhelmed with relief, with the simple joy of being alive. But as I stood, as I took my first steps back into the world, I felt it. The darkness, still lingering at the edges of my mind, a shadow that would never leave, a weight that would always be with me. The voice had been right. The terror, the madness, they would never truly leave me. They would be a part of me, a reminder of the abyss that I had faced, of the choice I had made. And as I walked away from the forest, from the place where the nightmare had begun, I couldn't help but wonder if I had truly escaped, or if the darkness was still waiting, biding its time, ready to claim me once more. The light had saved me, but the shadows were always there, lurking just out of sight, a constant reminder of the abyss that lay within. The world was the same, but I was not. The darkness had changed me, marked me, and as I looked back at the forest, at the place where the cave had been, I knew that it would never let me go. The terror, the fear, the madness, they were a part of me now, a part of my soul.